Good afternoon, Steve. Welcome to CloudTrade CTTV. This is, I think, number 6 in the series. Steve Rogers, who's with me today, is our Chief Finance Officer, and the subject that we've decided to talk about in the context of CloudTrade service is trade finance. And what does that mean to businesses? Now, trade finance, Steve, is a very broad subject. It covers all aspects of, I suppose, procurement. And from CloudTrade's point of view, just for the listeners who aren't familiar with us, we specialise in receiving and processing human-readable business transaction documents, such as an invoice. And trade finance obviously plays very well with processing an invoice. So from your point of view as a CFO, just if you wouldn't mind talking for a few moments about what does trade finance mean to you, and how do you think our customers would relate that in connection to what CloudTrade can deliver, and how that could help with their trade finance desires, options that they're looking for in the market today?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think I would take it back one step, even sort of further, if I may, to start off with, and
Sure.
talk about this kind of, the data that exists in the organisation. We all know that data is important to making key decisions in businesses, and I think it's important that, certainly as a CFO and other finance professionals will probably agree, that processing an invoice isn't just a standalone transaction. It's a transaction that involves extracting that data.
Mm-hmm.
You think about it over a period of time. Somebody says, "Oh, I've just processed the invoices." Well, what you've done by processing those invoices is have a whole load of data around what we've bought, how much we've spent, products. Sure. So it's got that whole importance. So I think it has to be taken in context of the importance of extracting that data from your supply chain, rather than just a function that is just a means to an end. And I think that the data has to be accurate to have any meaning. Like most things, we've both sat in meetings, I'm sure, where you review information and somebody says, "I'm not quite sure that's right," and straight away that then becomes the focus of the discussion for the rest of the meeting. Not what the data actually shows. It's the fact that somebody's queried it, and then so whoever's come up with the data is showing a bit of there's doubt in there. So it's fundamental to me to get that information as accurate as you can. And the trade finance angle really depends on what an organization's requirements are from trade financing. As we both know, you can get the trade financing on financing your receivables if you're not getting your cash in quick enough from your customers.
So that's what we affectionately call factoring.
Yes, that's factoring.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So probably, typically you might get 85 to 80% of your invoice value, but you get it quicker off somebody who's providing that finance.
So these are my sales invoices.
Yes.
Rather than me waiting 30, 60, 90 days for the cash to come in, I can sell effectively that invoice to a finance organisation who will then, as you say, give me 80, 85% of the value of that. Okay.
And then there's reverse factoring as well. So if you have an instance where you can have somebody else pay your suppliers, meaning that you can pay that provider on greater terms than what your suppliers will get. So it's possibly less common than people getting normal factoring and people getting that money in, but that exists as well. And again, for anybody to enter into an arrangement where they are providing factoring or reverse factoring, they're wanting to know that the information that they're making those decisions on, because effectively they're lending you that money, is it has to be accurate. It has to be, the invoices have to be validated, they have to be real, they have to be authorized by the business correctly, in order to give people those certainty that they are going to get, if it's factoring your receivables, that money is going to come in, and it's not going to be queried by the customer, and they're not going to get their money for 9 months because there's a query on the invoice. That doesn't exist. That doesn't work as a business model, clearly.
Sure. So I can see a number of benefits which I think we should explore. So if I've got invoices I need to pay for goods or services that I've received, and as you've described, looking at the service that CloudTrade provide, which is extracting data off an invoice and providing 100% accurate transfer into the back end system. If I was a lender to fund payment of those supplier invoices, knowing that I've got accurate data and it's been validated through a system, not through a human being where there could be errors, validated that this invoice is due for payment, then I'm going to have a lot of confidence to say, oh, I'll advance the funding for that. Now, as a buyer to take advantage of that, I guess that's going to be expensive. So typically, how would that be funded?
The funding of
having access to funds to pay the invoice for, say, I don't know, 30 days or 60 days. So there's obviously an interest rate that's going to be bearing on that money from the provider of those funds.
Yeah. So that was the fact that you would pay it earlier, or receive that money earlier is factored into the factoring or reverse factoring isn't done at 100% of the invoice value. So the providers are making their margin on that basis. And then also you've got the time value of money in the organization. If I'm not having to pay for those supplier invoices, what else can I do in the business with that cash that I'm generating, or the cash I'm holding on for longer?
Yeah.
And that for me, that comes down to your certainty that you have with your purchases over time, based on the fact that if I know what I'm going to buy for the next 6, 9, 12 months, and I know pretty much what I'm going to pay for it, I can then plan that, and I can say, well, if I'm going to spend £100,000 over the next 6 months on X, if I can get 20,000, if I can pay 20,000 less for that, let's take the example to the extreme, then I can plan what to do with that 20,000.
Okay.
I can plan my cash flow on that, or I can make an investment in the business if there's something else to spend that money on. So again, it comes back to having that certainty that comes back from having the accuracy in the data. And one of the worst things in the world would be if you're relying on an OCR or a manual based system, and you put this forecast together based on the invoices that you've processed so far, and then you find that there's errors in them, and then that could throw out long-term plans quite quickly.
Yeah.
So it is important to have that level of accuracy in the data, so it can be trusted and then used for the financial strategy of the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're hearing all the time accurate data, trusted data, for so many reasons. And we just, the very important one, as we're talking about today, is trade finance. So just put back into context what you've just said, because I think that's really interesting. One of the things I originally was in the construction sector, and I ran a plumbers merchants business. One of the things I used to survive on in terms of my margin was my settlement discount. So if I paid my suppliers on time, they would offer me a settlement.
Yeah.
And when I've been in this industry for data capture for many years, and I've done lots of presentations where I've talked to audiences about, if you can process an invoice in a timely manner and with the accuracy you've talked about, would your suppliers offer you a discount for paying them early? And quite often I get blank faces around the room. My own personal experience is, you settle an invoice in 30 days and it's net. So whatever the net value of the invoice is, you would pay that. If you pay early, maybe say in 10 days, then something like maybe 2%, could be offered as a discount. I personally experienced, although it was a number of years ago now, up to 10% settlement discount. And to your point, that 20,000 analogy you gave me, that's straight to your bottom line. That's working capital that you wouldn't have otherwise had, because you're paying less for that invoice because the privilege of paying it early. But also, I guess that 20,000 or whatever the value is going to help pay towards or pay all of the financing costs of paying those suppliers early, which is great news for you. It's great news for the supplier because they're getting the cash early. Just one of the things that strikes me around this is around the supply chain. If I'm a manufacturer, if I'm reselling goods, etc., my supply chain is critical for me, because without that, I haven't got the raw materials to, convert and to make into a profit. So in terms of processing an invoice in a timely manner in the supply chain finance, let's just explore a little bit about how that looks after the supply chain.
I think it's indifferent. It's sector and industry specific, isn't it? If you talk about manufacturing, where they need, the inputs are needed to be of a certain quality, and you need to make sure that your suppliers have that quality and can also supply the volumes of what you need. So it depends on who the industries that we're speaking to. The sort of items that we buy in CloudTrade aren't kind of specialized enough. We're not we're supplier agnostic for most of our supplies.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we haven't got to look after the working capital cycle. Clearly, businesses, we've all heard horror stories about dealing with big businesses where you won't get paid, and we've both sort of had sharp intakes of breath and signing contracts with big companies, and we'll find out that 90 days is the opening gambit.
Yeah.
So I think as a CFO, you've got to be cognizant of knowing your requirements of your supply chain versus how quickly you're going to get the money in, and you want to match them as closely as possible. As a small business, you're not in the business to try and screw suppliers on your working capital arrangements. So I would always try to match them quite closely. But it's all about having the relationships with those suppliers, so that if there are working capital issues, you've got to be able to have those open conversations. It's slightly off topic. We're not. Radio silence is what kills relationships with suppliers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If people phone you up saying, look, that invoice is a week overdue, not responding to them, is gonna let them draw their own conclusions.
Yeah.
And if that supply is key to you running your business, then you're really putting you're putting your business at risk by doing that. So. So I would always try to match that, and clearly you're going to want you to get paid. I'm going to want to get paid as quickly as possible for the items we sell, and I'm going to want to try and pay as long as possible on the items I'm purchasing.
Yeah.
But it's managing that. But again, we'll go back to the fact that if I'm taking those invoices in and I'm capturing that data, and I know that's accurate and it's going straight into my accounting system, it's not having it's not being open to any issues where it can't be read or it's being put in incorrectly. If it's going in there, that just gives me the confidence that I can agree a payment plan. I can run a payment run for the end of the month. I can get that information in advance, and that gives me certainty around the cash flow as much as I can, assuming that the cash the sales invoices are receipted as I expect them to be.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So just thinking about, again, the CloudTrade service and putting the conversation around trade finance into context. So thinking about the receipt of a invoice, the processing efficiently of the data, making sure that that's trusted, accurate data that gets delivered into the finance system, enabling that to support trade finance. So supply chain financing, i.e. paying your supplier invoices early, receiving a settlement discount, ensuring that our suppliers get paid to terms or early, improves their cash flow, improves their working capital, helps us look after their financial, their health. So it's a win-win. It's a win for us, win for them, and as we've just been discussing, it helps the overall supply chain relationship, which is critically important. So who would have thought just capturing data off an invoice could have such a major impact across the whole supply chain?
Absolutely, and we've got partners who use our services as part of their product offering around trade finance, and it's got to be key to that. Because it's less people on their side making decisions around the data, because it's being captured automatically. So it just makes sense. And we touched a little bit on kind of the dynamic discounting when talking about settlement discounting. I think that's evolved as technology has evolved. You probably haven't got to go very far back until settlement discounts was something that was alluded to on an invoice, and the value was there. We seem to move now to more situations where you have. If I was as a customer, I would have a portal where my invoices once my invoices are approved through a workflow system, they will be there to have the value drawn down.
Okay.
And there would be, like back to your example. So if I left it alone for 30 days, I would get the full invoice value. If I took it a week early, I would pay, I would get 95% of the value, or I would pay, some invoicing factoring value there, which I think is really good, because it means that you haven't got to set 5% or 10% as rigid values. You can just say, well, look, here's you take this invoice value on whenever day you want to, and here's the impact. And that's really useful, because it allows me, it means I haven't got to have one rule that I can't move away from. So at certain times of the month, I'll want that invoice as soon as possible, around payroll and PAYE or whatever, year end, maintaining year end cash balances if they're close to forecast, or for businesses they might have covenants where then they're not allowed to go under a certain level of cash against borrowings. But at other times, I might be happy. I might have a decent cash balance. I would rather wait the 30 or the 60 days and get the full value, because I haven't got, to be blunt, you might not have anything better to do with that cash. Finance is cheap at the moment. So then if you're not going to get interest in the bank. So depending on your kind of internal return rate in the business, you might not have anything that you're going to get the percentage on. So you might just think, I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite interesting, and we play our part in that with our partners. The sort of partners that we've got that offer that. But again, it comes back to that frequency and accuracy of the data being captured.
Fantastic. Well, as I start off by saying, a really interesting subject, very broad, very deep, as we've expressed today. So thank you for your time. And just for our listeners, if anybody does have an interest in discounting, in accuracy of data or trade finance, as Steve has mentioned, through our partners, we can certainly engage and look to see if we can help. So please get in touch. The usual contact details on our website, etc. So thanks everybody for your time. Steve, thanks for yours this morning or this afternoon, and look forward to our next discussion.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Okay,
cheers.
Take care.